Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LPL Summer Placements Week number 2 overview and analysis video. We, of course, covered Week number 1 last Monday. We are covering Week number 2 now. If you want to check out the video for Week number 1, that's going to be up in the iCard right now. Up there as well is going to be the video for the LPL primer that I did before the split even started, kind of giving my thoughts and opinions on where these teams could theoretically land. You can see how accurate or not accurate I was if you want up in the iCard as well. But of course, today we are going to be checking out Week number 2. It's basically halfway through the first placements series. It's really quick to get through the first part of the LPL split now, to get through kind of the first section and get into those group stages, the upper and the lower groups. So I'm excited to go over everything today. Of course, if you are excited as well, let me know down in the comments section below. What series were you most excited about? What teams were you most excited about? Who is over? Who is underperforming your expectations? Love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions on everything going on in the LPL down in the comments section below. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will be updating my personal power rankings at the end of the video as well. That's going to give you a good idea as to, what teams I think are real, what teams I do not think are real, and potentially what groups I think are a little over or underpowered right now, because I do not think all of these groups have been created equally. Some are definitely a lot more interesting than others. Some feel like they are already predetermined in terms of their outcome. Others, I think, definitely are a little bit more open for debate, so I'm excited to get into that. But, of course, that means we get to start with day number 1 if we're going series by series. And kicking off day number 1, we actually start with Group A this time. It took a while for this group to actually get their first series, but now they are rolling. It's a 1-0-0-1 matchup here between FunPlus Phoenix and LGD Gaming, and EDG is going to be able to take it 2-0, and this isn't a huge surprise when you consider the fact that there's been a lot of drama surrounding FPX this week. If you've not been caught up on any of that, this is not the channel for it. There's going to be a lot of, resources out there where you can learn about all the stuff that's going on off the Rift. I will quickly summarize it by saying it appeared Zhao Lao was getting benched, but not for, performance reasons, and there were a lot of arguments between the manager of FPX and the rest of the team. Milky Way and Care were in solidarity with their teammate, Zhao Lao, and it felt like the team dynamic just completely imploded at some point this past week, and they do not feel like they are on the same page at all. I don't know what decision was made. I don't know what they are going to do moving forward. The manager has since been let go by the organization, but it feels like the morale on this team has completely tanked. The drama surrounding them has really taken center stage, and that allowed EDG a really good opportunity to come in here and just kind of look good. They had a rough first series, but it was against LGD Gaming. You can live with that. Like, you can live losing 0-2 to JDG, especially because FPX really is your biggest competition in this group for getting that second spot. If you can beat them, here, especially 2-0, that is a very big confidence booster, and that does show that this team is very likely to be the second best team in the group, at least for the moment. Player of the series for me is pretty obviously going to go to Jeje in the jungle. This was not a hard decision. That Lee Sin game in game number 2 was about as perfect as you could possibly play it. He was still super active in game number 1 on the Xin Zhao. Just a great series overall from Jeje. I'm really hoping that with the improvement of the solo lanes, or the lanes in general, Leave and Wink included, with the improvement of those, his ability to play out the mid game is actually going to get back to where it was even just last year. It really felt like he took a big nosedive in the spring split even before the injury, because it didn't feel like he was being proactive at all in the early game. It felt like he was letting the game come to him, and he was losing a lot of tempo and pressure because of that. It's not easy to play when you have a bunch of losing lanes, and that's what they were last split. A bunch of losing lanes. It feels a lot more consistent now. Even the players that I didn't expect to be dominant early on are really good. They're playing really well right now. Solo Kill did a really good job on the top side. Going deathless is all you really need to see from him. He doesn't need to carry games. He doesn't need to dominate lane. He wasn't even really all that good in game number 2, but game number 1 he was excellent, and he didn't make any mistakes. He didn't make any major errors. He didn't cost this team any tempo or pressure, which is all you need him to do. Leave and Wink were also very good. Wink in particular had a great series, pulling out that Sejuani in game number 1 for Fearless, I think, is super cool. really opens up a lot of doors for the rest of the team to pull out some weird shit for the rest of the series, and if this would have went to 3, that would have helped them a lot. Obviously, it didn't, but Wink played the Sedge at a super high level. He was probably the best player in Game 1, and he was still very good on the rel in Game number 2, the primary creator, primary facilitator for EDG, and his addition, I think, has, it's been talked up a lot. It's worth it. Like, Wink is a really, really good player, and he deserves all the hype he's getting right now. Leave did a good job capitalizing. Cryin was fine, Solo Kill was good, but Jeje was the star for me, especially on that Lee Sin in Game number 2, where he really did just kind of take over. If he's going to play like that, EDG is clearly going to be the number 2 team in this group. And then for FPX on the other side, it's really hard to get an idea of where this team could be right now because, again, I just don't know what is going on in their heads. This felt like a pretty traditional FPX loss, and so I'm not going to sit here and say that their playstyle has changed a lot. It felt like Milky Way getting all the resources, and either he was able to carry the game or he wasn't. Unfortunately, in this one, he was not able to carry the game, but there are definitely some concerns. The new who came in, it could be the new. Let me know down in the comment section below. I don't actually know 100% how to pronounce that. He was horrible in Game number 1. I understand the idea of wanting to put him in. He's been a really decent prospect at the LDL level. His tape is actually pretty solid, and Xiao Lao, who's not like a star or anything like that, but he was horrible in this first game on Mordekaiser. He got absolutely obliterated by Solo Kill, who is certainly not established at this level at all, so they took him out. They put Xiao Lao back in for Game number 2. Much better laning phase from topside, but it didn't really matter. Everywhere else on the map lost. Milky Way was the one getting all the resources here for FPX, as he typically is, but unfortunately, he just wasn't better than Jeje on the other side of this matchup. That really is kind of the difference maker. When he's not the better jungler in a series like this, it's basically impossible for FPX to win. So not really an ideal circumstance there. I think Dectum and Life definitely took a step back from their first series in week number 1. Not that they were perfect, across all of last split, but they were pretty good last split. They were great against Thunder Talk. Not really a good rebound here in week number 2, but again, it's just one series here. And then Care, not really all that useful, just kind of existed in the mid lane, didn't really do anything about it. I'm still shocked that no team wants to put Corki anywhere near the bot lane. They are just exclusively using him as a mid laner still. I would expect that to change because I think he's stronger in the bot lane, but it's just my opinion. It's just what I would expect these teams to do, but generally it feels like the problem right now for FPX is that their playstyle hasn't really evolved, and now they also have, like, out-of-game issues, and they already weren't a team that I trusted all that much. They were number 9 in my power rankings even when they had good synergy, even when we didn't know there were problems behind the scenes, and so now that there are, this is very likely not a top 10 team, and that is very disappointing. But for Edward Gaming, this might open the door for them. This is a really big win. This is a really good situation for them to be in. Like, FPX is their biggest rival. They're not going to be better than JD Gaming, but they also should definitely be better than Thunder Talk. And so if you're talking about the other team to get out of this group, FPX is your biggest competition, and a win 2-0 like this is pretty huge in that direction. They need to be able to keep up this momentum, obviously, but, I feel like this is a team that absolutely can do that. They may not have the highest ceiling in the world, but their floor seems to be pretty good. Then moving on to the second series of day number 1, and it's a very good team versus a very bad team going kind of how you would expect. It's Bilibili Gaming taking on LGD Gaming, and as you would expect, I mean, they did 2-0. They did at least win both games. They didn't drop a game randomly to LGD, but it wasn't quite as clean as maybe that would appear. This was a 2-0, but both of these games were very winnable by LGD, specifically game number 2. I think if they had played game number 2 in, even a remotely good way, if LGD had shown up at all in that second game, they probably would have won it, because a lot of mistakes coming in from Bilibili, but I'm willing to excuse them. This team plays weirdly bad against LGD. We see this sometimes where good teams can just not care all that much against teams that are lower on in the standings, and I feel like that's what's happened both times that these two teams have played this split, is that BLG is just like, it's LGD, we're not going to try all that hard, and LGD makes it a lot more difficult than they think it will be, and then, BLG has to actually go and try in the late game. Typically speaking, they're saved by Bin. Gigabin definitely showed up in this series, especially in game number 2 here on the Rumble. He's going to get player of the series. This was not a difficult decision. I think if there had been even a remotely close performance in the top lane between both of these teams, game number 2 would have been pretty close. It wasn't like that. Top gap was pretty huge in this series, and in game 2 in particular, and Bin definitely the one that you can count on for something like that. I think a lot of people are going to look at Bertle and say Bertle sucks. Obviously, this is another Burden performance, but again, I will continue to defend Bertle. He was not good in this series, but a lot of people aren't very good when Bin actually tries, and Bin was actually trying here. I actually got some pushback in my my primer video at the beginning of the split, where I put Bin as an A and not an A+, plus, even though I consider him the best top laner in the world. A lot of people want him as an A plus. This was an A plus caliber performance. The only reason he's not an A plus is that he has at times been known to take off regular season games. He is a part of that generation of top laners in the LPL that just refuse to play every single game as hard as they can, and because of that, he's not really going to perform like an A plus top laner for a lot of splits, but he will have those performances where it's like, this guy's the best player in the world, and this was one of those performances where it's like, he's the best player in the world. I give more credit to Bin than I take away credit from LGD, even if I think they could have played a lot better, but there were other positives here. I know people are going to look at Knight and On in game number 2 and say that they were both inting, and I agree, Knight and On in game 2 both inted. The Hui was horrible, and Knight was just not good in this series in general. He did not have a good day, but On was really good in game number 1 on the Rel. So I do want to excuse some of the weird decisions he made on the Nautilus in game number 2. Yes, he did int that game, and it wasn't a particularly good-looking one, but at the very least, he looked good in the first game, and On is obviously a lot more of a feast or famine player. You know, he's the best possible version of a player like Hylissang. We've always known that that's who On is, and so I'm not entirely shocked to see that kind of performance, but Knight does have to be better. I get that Haichao has been strong this year, but Knight being the worst of the 2 mid laners this series was not on my bingo card. That is for sure. Shun was flipping a lot of these fights for absolutely no reason. I get Karthus and Kindred kind of play into that play style a bit, but I would still like to see some consistency, and Elk wasn't perfect either. This really was a Gigabin carry type of series, and especially game number 2, they're happy to have him, but that's the perk of being a team full of like the world's best players, is that even if some way, somehow, 4 of your members are all underperforming, if one of your guys steps up, you're probably going to be able to win that series because they are all that good. So credit to Ben. He did his best 1v9 impression. He probably won't have to do that a ton for the rest of the split. But for LGD, if they had played even competently like human beings, they probably win game number 2. The Zyra is such a weird, interesting pick. Again, we're seeing this in other regions. We saw it in the LEC. It's just a very interesting thing to talk about because it's the fastest clear in the game, or at least as far as I'm aware, it's the fastest clear in the game. Maybe Karthus is the only thing that can keep up with it, but I can't remember anybody farming faster than what Zyra currently does, but she doesn't really do a ton else. Like, her objective control is pretty solid, but she can't really fight. Like, she's not a PvP type of champion in the jungle. It does kind of fit what Meteor likes to do. He likes to play Graves, Kindred, you know, things that want to farm up into the late game and be more utility for the team, but I don't really think Zyra's as strong as a lot of pros are making her out to be right now, and I think we saw the negatives of that towards the back half of game number 2, where it really did feel like a lot of those fights were 4v5, and that's never a good situation to be in. And then Bertle, he's going to get done of the series. Like I said, I am going to defend him a little bit, because people just kind of lose to Bin. Like, losing to Bin is not the end of the world. I see some people saying, like, oh, you know, Bertle clearly is like the worst top laner in the league because of this performance, where we've seen much better top laners than Bertle look just as bad against Bin, especially when he's trying. It just kind of happens against that player. Bertle, for the most part, has been a positive. He was a big reason why LGD finished in 11th in the previous split. Him and Haichao were the 2 best players on LGD pretty clearly in the spring split, and so I'm not going to sit here and freak out. Bertle continues to be a player that I think is a middle-tier LPL top laner in a league of bad top laners, quite frankly, or at least not deep top laners. There's 5 to 6 good top laners in the league, and then everybody else kind of fighting over the scraps. So LGD, you know, they are what they are. I expected them to fall off going into summer, and that's exactly what they've done. BLG does scrape out a win here. You would have hoped it would have been a bit more consistent, but at least they picked up the W. Happy for Bin. The rest needs to get cleaned up, but I imagine it will. This is not a team I'm worried about, you know, failing in the future. And then moving on to day number 2, and we kick day 2 off with a Group D matchup. The undefeated team taking on the winless team in the group. It's Invictus Gaming taking on Anyone's Legend, and AL does pick up their 3rd win of the split, at least in terms of series, and they're 6-0 to start off summer. I was super high on this team in my predictions. I think I had them 7th, which is a lot higher than a lot of other people would have put them, but they have exceeded that expectation so quickly. This team is legit, or at least at the moment they feel like they are legit. I'm not going to say that this team is perfect, that they don't have their flaws. There are still concerns because these players have at times been known to fall off as the split progresses. Players like Krako and Shanks have not exactly been the most consistent in terms of keeping their momentum throughout the entirety of a split, but I think the shortened kind of seasons or parts, the parts of this split, you know, you have this one stage where it's a group stage, and if you get out of that, all of a sudden it's a new stage, and then all of a sudden you're in playoffs. I think that could actually help this team a lot in terms of their consistency, but all of that being said, that's really the only worry and negative that you can throw at them right now, because they are in the most competitive group in the entire league, and they are smashing it. They are 6-0 for a reason. They look incredible. IG is just not good. I'm not going to try to sit here and say that this team is like unbelievable, and that AL winning this is a clear indictment that they are one of the best teams in the league. Like, Invictus is probably the worst team in the LPL. I think that has become even more clear as we've watched more games, but at least AL was able to take care of business in pretty quick fashion against them. Shanks is a pretty clear choice for player of the series. This guy is just popping off over and over and over again. This guy was on actual MVP pace for a majority of the spring split. Some people like to forget that because the final 2 to 3 weeks of the season, he was complete garbage. It was a really weird kind of dichotomy to talk about. Like, the first 2/3 of the split, he genuinely was as good as any other mid laner. Knight, Yagao, whoever you want to put, Rookie, whoever you want to put in that conversation, Shanks was right there with them in terms of performances. He just could not keep it going. He could not keep it sustainable once this team started to fall off. A part of that was Krako just kind of losing in the jungle. Part of it was top lane being a complete black hole for AL in the spring split. But now that they have a much more complete roster, maybe Shanks is going to be on that MVP pace. I certainly think it's possible for him. Again, all we've ever wanted to see is the consistency. It's never been the lack of high moments. Even on that 0-16 WE team, like, there were some really good games from Shanks, and he was still the player to kind of watch on that team. He's never really been in a position where it's like, oh, I don't see the upside. The upside has always been there. It's just been about putting it together game after game, and he's doing that right now. The Yone was brilliant in game number 2. The Corki was awesome in game number 1. He is just dominating right now, and I hope he's going to be able to keep it up. He's the one player to watch for me from AL that could really stand out as an MVP guy. I thought Ale could get there as well, and he's been excellent at the start of this split, but Shanks is definitely the guy here on AL. As for the rest of the team, Hope and Kale are kind of a cheat code. Kale is back. Like, this is LCK Kale through the first 3 series. I'm not going to try and sit here and say that everything's perfect for them, but yeah, this is 2022, like, top 5 support in the world Kale that has returned for this team. The Nautilus, the Leona, it doesn't matter. He is setting everything up perfectly for his carries. He is there to make everybody else in the team look like $1 million. That's what he did at a superstar level on Sandbox in 2022, even at times last year in 2023, even though it wasn't perfect. It is crazy to see that teams would have given up on him, that Sandbox would want to move in a different direction, that no LCK team would have wanted to take a punt on him, because he is legitimately ridiculously good. Like, he is so selfless in terms of how he plays the game. He's so well-rounded. He's a great laner. He's a great team fighter. He's a great roamer. He's just great in every facet of the game. His one defect is that he buys too many control wards. Okay, I can live with that. That's your worst quality. Like, that's the only bad quality you have. I can live with that. Like, Kale and Shanks are genuinely, like, on pace to be 2 of the best players in the LPL. Full stop right now, and that's pretty ridiculous. Hope, Krako, Ale, they all looked good, but Shanks and Kale definitely looked like the stars of this team. I hope they can keep that up. And then for IG, not really a lot of analysis to give, if I'm being entirely frank with you. This team is playing exactly how we thought they would. They have a couple of interesting pieces. I think Nenny has been interesting, at the very least, to watch. He was okay in week number 1. On is still a player that I think in the right circumstance could be strong, but nobody else in this team is consistent at all. Vampire probably had his best series in a while, and that's saying something because it's not like he was a huge impact. He just didn't really play negatively in this series. I think that there were actually some positive notes to take away from Vampire's performance. Really, all you're looking for is development from him. He was a solo queue player thrown into one of the highest expectations in the world on LGD Gaming, and he was the worst player in the LPL because he's just not ready for this level. He still isn't ready for this level. He still needs to go back down to the LDL and, like, get his feet under him before he's just thrust into this kind of situation, but at the very least, there is some small developments happening, and I think that's good. Top side of the map was a disaster. GLFS is going to get dead of the series when you're getting completely out-jungled by Krako's Viego. You're not really in a great spot. Like, that's never a good sign. Julian in the top lane is just whatever. Like, he doesn't really seem to be a make or break kind of player. Definitely going to be interesting to see where You Should Know Me goes, because clearly he's not going to be playing for this team. There are upside pieces here for Invictus. It's not going to happen this year. This team is not going to be good. I would be surprised if they were even competitive. This clearly feels like the worst team in the group, especially with Ultra Prime actually being interesting. But for AL, like, they are solid. This is genuinely a good team. There's really not a lot else to learn from them. They have shown you everything that you need to be shown. Shanks is great. Kale is great. And if Ale, Krako, and Hope are your secondary pieces, like, that's pretty darn good. AL is very much on pace to be a Worlds team right now, and I'm very excited to say that. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2, another Group D matchup. It's Ninjas in Pyjamas taking on Ultra Prime, and NIP is going to pick up the victory here. They're going to move to 2-1, and this is a much better look from the team than what we saw at the end of them from the previous week. This is back to basics for them. This is how they played throughout a lot of the spring split, and why I was so excited for them through a lot of the spring split. I know they lost to AL, not that bad of a loss. In hindsight, that team looks like they're going to be pretty darn good, and Ultra Prime is definitely not a pushover. They moved into my top 10 after last last week because they did look genuinely good, even against good competition, and they showed some interesting things here. I think in a better matchup, they probably would have been a little bit closer, but I think NIP did everything that they were supposed to do in this matchup in order to kind of separate themselves. A couple of things that really make me excited for Ninjas in Pyjamas moving into this like upcoming split, moving into summer, and with the expectations that they do want to make Worlds, is that their solo laners are both playing really well right now. We expected that out of Rookie. He's going to get player of the series. He was the best player in the series by a considerable margin. He dominated game 1 and game 2. He definitely was the focal point for how they wanted to play, which is not a shock. This is what this team has been basically the entirety of this year. It's been get Rookie ahead. Hopefully Photic and Juo can win on their own 2v2 and then just kind of hope to win from there. That's kind of been what they have been so far this year, and Rookie has been good enough to be able to facilitate that. He's been a top 5-ish player in the world, somewhere around that. He really has been that good. I know some people might be like, that's a crazy thing to say, but go watch him play in spring. You would agree with me if you went and watched some of that tape, but you can't rely on that all the time. As we saw last week, when Rookie loses, this team doesn't feel like they have that secondary, player, that secondary guy to come in and win the game for them. It's not really been Photic and Juo so far in summer. I feel like they've returned a bit to normalcy after a really good spring split. Really, unfortunately for this team, they're going to rely on Shanji. The lucky thing for them is it does feel like he is bouncing back after what was a super bad spring split, the worst split of his entire career, basically, no doubt. Like, he was underperforming in every aspect of the game. He was losing in lane. He was not affecting the game in team fights. He was not playing strong weak side. Like, he was just bad in spring, and I don't really know what the reason for that was. He was on such a good trajectory as a prospect. Coming out of OMG, he got to keep his own jungler in Aki to kind of keep that familiarity between the two of them. Something just happened where he didn't feel nearly as comfortable. I don't know what it was, but he was not nearly good enough in spring. So far in summer, he's actually been really good. He's probably been this team's second best player, and that's what you need to hear. You need to see Shanji play like a top 3 top laner like he was last year and like he kind of was on the trajectory to be for the rest of his career. I think that's realistic to expect from Shanji, but it's at least nice to see it on the Rift, as opposed to whatever we saw in the spring split, which was a bit of a disaster. But Rookie playing well. Photic and Juo weren't bad this game. I'm certainly not going to be negative on them. I thought the draft in game number 2 was really good from Ninjas in Pyjamas, and they did a good job to actually put themselves in a good position. I think Photic and Juo were a big part of that. Aki was solid. Didn't really make any mistakes, even if Hacker was pretty good on the other side of this. NIP just a lot more calm and collected, a lot more business as usual for them, which I think is a good thing overall. And then for Ultra Prime on the other side, man, they've got some really good parts and some real issues. Hacker was really good in this series, and I know the scoreline doesn't indicate that, but he's playing really well. This might be the best year of his career. I know that's a pretty crazy thing to say. I get comments all the time, though, about how Hacker is stealing jobs in the LPL, about it's kind of crazy that Hacker still has a job in the LPL. I get comments like that a lot, especially when I do my player grades videos, but I just can't look at what Hacker has done so far in 2024 and see anything other than, like, at worst, an average jungler at the LPL level, one that would be a positive for a lot of teams that have really struggled in that department. He has been very active in the early game. He has attempted to set his team up for success. Has it always been perfect? No, but for the most part, it's actually been a big positive. Yuakai, certainly an interesting player, going to run it sometimes, as we saw at times in this series, but it'll get him resources, and he's kind of banking on the fact that he can outplay his opponent. Couldn't happen here. That's not going to happen against the best mid laners in the region, but still a player you can win games with, just not win games because of, in my opinion. The real problem has been topside. Qing Tian has been horrible for this team, and I was really hoping that he was going to start for them because he has such a higher floor, in my opinion, than Decade did, and generally speaking has a higher ceiling as well, but it has not worked out that way. He even got the Skarner in game number 2, which is just ridiculously broken on 14-10, and he still couldn't do anything on it. He has been really bad through the first 2 weeks, clearly the worst player on Ultra Prime, and that's a real big disappointment to me because there was real upside with this team figuring out their topside situation. Even just getting someone passable, like below average in that role, would have been fine. But if they continue to have another player in this role who's going to compete to be the worst in that role in the entire region, that's a problem. Like, that is not a good thing to have. Doggo and Nickit are fine. Nickit is actually really good, but Doggo is so passive that it almost doesn't matter. He's so scared to go out there and make any plays that it doesn't matter that Nickit's creating things on the Leona and the Nautilus. It's basically exclusively for Yuakai and Hacker in skirmishes and team fights. And so Ultra Prime does have a lot of positives going for them. I still think they're better than they have any right to be considering the talent on this team, but there are real problems, and they're not going to be competitive at the top of the standings because of that. This is not going to be a top 7 or 8 team in the league. It's just they don't have the ability to do that with their weaknesses right now. But Ninjas in Pyjamas is solid. I do still think that this team can be a contender. I still think they can make Worlds. I'm not sold that they're going to be that, especially because it does feel like a better team exists in their group right now in anyone's legend, but they have the talent to do so. If Rookie can keep playing like one of the best players in the world, it's super possible for them to continue to stay on that trajectory. Shanji looks really solid. If you can get that, spring version of Photic and Juo, this is going to be a scary team. And then moving on now to day number 3, and day 3 is going to kick off with a Group C matchup between LNG Esports and Rare Atom. That shockingly, Rare Atom is actually going to pick up a nice win, and it's our first 3-game series of the week. Pretty crazy to get that on day 3, but Rare Atom picking up a 2-1 win is huge for their chances in this group. Not only do they go ahead of LNG to put themselves in second place, but they do it with already a pretty good record. 2-3 is just about as good as you can get, having the schedule that they have had up until this point. You know, taking games off of teams like Top Esports and LNG are necessary for RA to really have any shot of getting out of this group in the top 2. And this win is absolutely massive. People were talking about LNG's demise and, you know, how they were frauds after week number 1 because they lost to Top Esports, who is apparently a team that people have just forgotten is really good, even though they just beat JDG twice in the playoffs. And you know, whatever, like that is obviously something that is very crazy, but this is a more concerning loss. Rare Atom is a good team and honestly probably is a top 10 team in terms of their performances right now. Really like their offseason acquisitions. I think they've really upgraded this team in a lot of key areas, but there are problems for LNG, and we'll talk about that when we get to them. But with Rare Atom, player of the series was honestly kind of difficult. I thought bot lane was really good, and we'll talk about them in a second, but player of the series for me is going to go to Xiaohao. I still find it absolutely hilarious that Weibo Gaming brings Xiaohao in for the spring split. They give him some time to try to get used to the rest of the team. He levels up as that split goes along. He's playing the best league he plays all year by the end of the split. In the playoffs, he's definitely the only player on that team that is playing consistently at all. And then all of a sudden he gets released. They want to go in a different direction. I get it. Tarzan is a pretty enticing player to want to bring on, especially with, you know, Breathe in there, and like you want to try and get a facilitator as opposed to Xiaohao, who is a bit more of a carry. But of course, Xiaohao is kind of the king of summer. Ever since 2022, he has been one of the best junglers in the league in the summer split. That's kind of always been his thing, is that he has stepped his game up as the year has continued to go along. So for Weibo Gaming to drop him right before the summer split, for Rare Atom to be fortunate enough to be able to pick him up near the bottom of the standings, I think that's going to be a good thing for them overall. He's going to continue to look really good. He is in his element and at his best when he is the primary option on a team, and he has the reins here. There is nobody that is going to be taking that primary option away from him unless Xiaoshu really like makes that next step, like takes that next leap. That hasn't happened so far. Xiaohao is the guy here on Rare Atom, and I think that's just going to help them overall. He played awesome, specifically in game number 2 here on the Lilia. I thought he was fantastic. But again, credit to the bot lane. That's the other part of this team that they obviously upgraded. Jue is in here to play support, and this is a brilliant move here for Rare Atom. They look great having acquired him. Now, I'm not going to try and criticize Ultra Prime because they went out and got Nickit, who is clearly a very good support in his own right, a very good, interesting prospect, but Jue was the best player on Ultra Prime for considerable parts of that previous split. Him alongside Hacker were really doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and Jue has carried a lot of that over here to Rare Atom. He had an amazing series, very nearly gave him player of the series, but Assume, awesome, especially in game 3 on the Jhin. You know, Jhin obviously gets a lot of flack online on Reddit because people like to see him as this champion that can't really do anything. You know, Reddit's often wrong about League of Legends analysis. It's a big reason why I started this channel, but Jhin does have his own merits. He does a lot of things that other AD carries currently in the meta just can't do, especially with games going longer and longer, with games being drawn out more. Jhin honestly gains a lot of relevance to be able to set up other carries like Talia and Yone more than any other AD carry can. If you need a weak side ADC, Jhin is just about the best in the game right now for that role. He can still carry, though, as we saw in that game number 3. It's not like he was just weak side in this series. Assume was really good. Vikla, Xiaoshu, they were fine. Vikla's definitely playing better right now than he did in the spring split. Hasn't been a carry, but certainly has been good enough. And Xiaoshu, I just want to see him take that next leap. He hasn't really done that. I feel like he's honestly playing worse this year than he did in 2023, and that's okay. Like, again, sophomore slump, like, you can live with the result he's putting out. He's not been the worst top laner in the league or anything. There really have not been a lot of very consistent top laners, so you can live with that. But Xiaohao looks like he's going to be a star once again for this team, and everybody could have seen that coming. And then for LNG, real problems exist for this roster. I think the first thing that I want to point out, Zika's going to get dead of the series. I said in basically every primer video and for every region, for the LCS, for the LEC, for the LCK, man, top lane's really good right now. It's a very deep role. Basically, every region has a lot of very good top laners. It's really hard to separate yourself at that position. The opposite has been true here in the LPL. Top laners have been really bad, and this position feels really shallow in the LPL. That could be something that holds this region back internationally, because I do think that outside of the top, like, 4, 5, 6 top laners, maybe even really just top 5 top laners in the league, like, nobody's really all that good right now. Nobody's even really passable, and Zeke is a good example of that. Like, he's okay, he's good, but he's never really separated himself as like a top-tier top laner. He was probably best in 2023 spring. That was probably the best split he ever had, but outside of that, he's kind of just been a guy for this team, and he got rolled in this series, and I get it. Like, top lane sometimes looks a little bit worse when your team's not playing well, but Zika was a big reason why a lot of those problems existed at all in this series. He has not been playing well to start this year. Gala and Hong are not playing nearly as well as they did towards the end of the split. I still think Gala is playing fine, but Hong not nearly playing the way that he did at the back half of the split for LNG. Maybe tougher competition catching up to him, and Scout and Weiwei just do not have chemistry. There's nothing else for me to say at this point. I like the fact that Scout's moving into this more like, I'm just going to play TF and move around the map kind of play style, and honestly, Scout was the best player on the team in this series, and Weiwei really wasn't all that bad either. He was playing things like Brand and was able to actually generate pressure, and, you know, Weiwei and Scout weren't the problem, but you know, they're not winning games for this team like you would have expected them to do in the preseason. LNG has real issues that I just don't know if they're going to be able to resolve. This team right now is on pace to not make it out of their group, to make it down to the lower group. That would be a bit of a disaster for them. They really don't want to be in that situation. They don't want to have to play through the play-ins to get into playoffs. It's just never really ideal for a team because there's so much variance in one best of 5. But, you know, Rare Atom is one of those teams that you have to watch out for. This team is clearly good enough to be able to take games off of teams that aren't prepared or not in a good state right now, and they have clearly shown that they are in a position to be able to make the most of that. So credit to RA, they are stepping up. This is an org that I've respected a lot for the moves that they made, even if they haven't worked out. This might be the team that finally puts it together for them after a pretty long hiatus. And then moving on to our second series of day number 3, another Group C matchup, another 2-0-0-2. It's Top Esports taking on OMG, and again, as expected, Top Esports is going to get the job done very, very cleanly here. This was a dominating series from them. They never really felt like they were in any danger. OMG does make a roster substitution going into this one. Cube is out. He has been released by the organization. He's not even being kept on as a sub. Totally understand that. Cube has just not been good for like 2 years. They went out and got him in the offseason, I think purely based off of reputation and the hope that he could turn his career back around, but one split later, he is gone because he has just not been good for them. He has not been good for really anyone, and they bring in Harry, who, to his credit, has also not been particularly good at the LPL level, but Harry has been at least deemed an upside kind of guy for a lot of different teams. He has been, you know, he was brought into AL as like this big upside top laner who could potentially turn into something, you know, further down the line. I've never really seen it in Harry. He's never been good in the LPL, but at least I think it's a better move than Cube. Like, at least you're an upgrade in that regard. I think he's probably a bit more stable on that side, and he also has a bit more upside to be a carry in the future. He's just not really all that consistent in any facet of the game. But with that being said, let's talk about what actually happened in this series. Player of the series is pretty easily going to go to Tion. It's really funny watching this. I understand the concerns that come with Top Esports because this team has kind of been known to underperform in big situations in the past. This org has kind of been known to do that in the past. They've never really lived up to expectations, if you will, except for the fact that they constantly do well domestically. And I get that LPL fans don't really like to look at domestic kind of performances as something that matter a lot, but especially with everything going on, you know, with the New Americas League and like learning more about the CBLOL, it's pretty crazy to me how little, you know, fans tend to care about winning your domestic league or being really relevant in your domestic league. Top Esports overperformed domestically. This team beat LGD Gaming twice in the playoffs, and still the top comment on every single one of their wins in a post-match thread on Reddit, or, you know, if you look at the comment section on Twitter, or, you know, all of the replies are just going to be, yeah, but this team is going to choke in the end. This team really doesn't choke domestically. Like, they do sometimes, I guess, but this roster certainly hasn't. They overperformed in the spring split. They've been really good to start so far, and there's really not a lot of reason to believe that this won't be one of the top 2 teams in the LPL, at least at the current moment. At very worst, one of the top 3. It feels like top 3 feels very locked in, and Top Esports is a part of that. So I don't really get all the pessimism surrounding this team. They're 6-0, and they've never really looked like they're in danger at all this split so far, and I think all of that is to their credit. I mean, RA is a decent team. LNG is a decent team, even if they're underperforming right now. Being able to beat those teams is not bad. And Tion, I get it. Like, he's not being tested at all, and he's going for super risky plays and just kind of getting away with it because he's not playing competition that is remotely on his skill level, and maybe that will translate worse against better teams. I can definitely understand that. There's a reason I don't think he's an A-graded jungler, but he played awesome this series. Like, he was truly incredible on both the Nidalee and the Maokai. He was everywhere he needed to be at every time. I would say he 1v 1v9'd, but it's not like the rest of this team played bad. He just was so far and away the most valuable player on the Rift in both of these games, was so far and away the most relevant player across this entire series. And I get why people don't like Tian, because again, against really good junglers, sometimes those aggressive plays don't work out nearly as consistently. But when you want like a pub stomper, when you want someone to go up against OMG and just single-handedly win you the game, like Tian might be the best in the world at that right now. He is playing really well, and it's not like he was bad at MSI. Like, he was generally fine at MSI. I understand that TES disappointed at MSI, and that's going to be how every LPL fan remembers them, as oh, they lost to G2, but they got to MSI for a reason, and Tian's been playing really well this year. Jackie Love and Mako continue to look like one of the best bot lanes in the world. Jackie Love in particular just can't be stopped on Senna. At some point, you just have to permaban this champion out. Against top esports, I get you don't really want to do that, but he is too good on this champ to really give him the opportunity. 369 is one of the best top laners in the world. Cream, I think, has gotten better over the course of this year than he has really been at any point in his career. I really trust top esports. This is clearly a top 2 team in the league for me. This is going to be a team that continues to compete for top tier international spots. The pessimism around them is just very confusing to me. And then for OMG on the other side, the pessimism around this team is not nearly enough right now. This team is horrible. They were number 13 in my power rankings. If nothing changes over the course of this week, they are definitely going to go down because they do not look good at all right now. In fact, they look pretty horrible right now. Xiao Feng was the one player in week 1 that actually had any sort of relevance in any of their games, and he was completely out-jungled in this series. He's going to get dud of the series. If Xiao Feng's not playing well, this team is not going to win games. Angel already feels like he is not going to be able to repeat what he was able to do in summer of last year and in spring of this year, because he's definitely playing at a lower level than he had in either of those splits right now. He is losing lanes super consistently, just not really able to go toe-to-toe in the 1v1 like he had been over the past couple of splits. Starry and PB God are not good. I was entirely correct, unfortunately, about Starry. I was very negative about him coming in to this team. I thought it was a huge mistake to not start Abel over Starry, and that seems to absolutely be correct. Starry has looked like one of the worst AD carries in the entire region so far, and PB God has certainly not done anything to be able to elevate him after a really rough spring split from him as well. Harry coming into the top lane didn't really change anything. He was not the problem here. He was certainly not the issue on this team. In fact, he was probably the best player on this team if you really want to go down that route in terms of their ability to actually make plays in this series, if only because the Rumble was doing something. But this team was completely outclassed in every facet. This was not a close series. OMG was never really in it, and this is one of the worst teams in the LPL at the current moment, which is really sad. This was a playoff team in the spring split, and even though I and a lot of other people predicted that they would not be because of the changes going into summer, it still is really disappointing to see them fall as far as they have. And, you know, it is top esports. I'm not going to try to freak out, but this group has shown that they are not really able to keep up, and TES is able to keep up. I still, again, do not understand the pessimism. This is one of the best teams in the world, regardless of their showing at MSI, and I imagine that this team will continue to get better. Maybe they're going to be a bit inconsistent. That's something that you can be a bit disappointed by, but we've seen what happens to inconsistent teams when they're playing well at the right time. They can go pretty far, and I think TES has a lot of that like 2022 DRX kind of vibe in terms of they can win any game. They're talented enough to do that. They can lose any game as well. So for TES destroying OMG, it's fine, but it's more about the big picture of going 6-0 to start this group. Then moving on now to day number 4, kind of our middle day of the week here, and we kick it off with one series that I was really excited to talk about here, Anyone's Legend taking on Weibo Gaming, and Weibo Gaming's going to pick up the 2-0 series win. Everybody was talking about how Weibo was doomed, that they were dead in the water, that they were never going to be able to win another series, and it turns out sometimes week 1 doesn't tell you the entire story. I know people love to just make full assumptions about how a team is going to operate for the rest of the year based off their first week as a unit, but I was not willing to make that. I've defended Weibo a lot over the course of last week. I said that there was a lot they needed to fix. I outlined what I thought the problems were, and just to recap, if you didn't watch that week 1 video, I outlined the problem as, okay, well, you brought in Breathe and Tarzan, neither of whom have been primary carries for their team ever. Tarzan is not a carry. He is somebody who wants to play Maokai. He wants to play Sejuani. He wants to play Zac. These are the champions that he's really been really good at over the course of his career. He's been great as a tank engaged supportive style jungler. It's why all of the situations where he's worked best, he's worked with some of the most talented mechanical mid laners in the world. You know, Scout and Chovy come to mind as the two players that he's really played the best with, and I think to get the best out of a player like Tarzan, especially introducing him into a new team, you want a mid laner who wants to, quite frankly, skirmish less. You don't want somebody who wants to go out there and play super aggressive. I thought Xiaohu would actually be a pretty good fit with that, but Xiaohu has been really bad to start this split. His laning has been really lackluster, and so I think Tarzan really was kind of put in bad positions because of that, and generally speaking, Tarzan is always just going to be the scapegoat because of the general perception of him and junglers in the LPL. I've talked about it plenty. on this channel over the past couple of years, LPL fans have a pseudo fetish for trying to scapegoat junglers. They just love doing it when they have a team that they want to be better than they actually are, or a team that they think will fall off, or a team that's not performing in the way that they want. It's instantly point to the jungler and blame him. It's Tian on top Esports. It was Karsa on Weibo before they brought in Weiwei. It's Weiwei now on LNG. It was Tarzan on LNG. It's just like AFK, let's look at the jungler, it's his fault. Like, there's really not a lot of thought put into it by a lot of LPL fans, and oftentimes I think that there are much bigger problems, and I think that line of thinking has caused LPL teams to make major mistakes in the past, and that's what I really want to push back on. You just give this team time, and I thought they would figure it out. I still don't think all of their problems have gone away, but this is a huge win. This was an undefeated AL team that they just went out and beat. Also, if anyone is surprised by Weibo Gaming being the team to step up and beat AL in this group, that's crazy. This is what they do. Anybody who's followed the LPL should have expected this, that Weibo was struggling, that AL was looking good. That means Weibo is going to win. This is truly the counter logic team. CLG doesn't exist anymore. You want a counter logic team, it's Weibo Gaming. This is who they have always been, with or without the Shy. This is, kind of just the identity of the organization, we'll say, at this point. So we'll talk about what actually happened in the game. Player of the series is going to go to Tarzan. He was the most consistent member of the team across this entire series, was amazing in game number 1 on the brand, was constantly ahead in terms of the jungle matchup, was able to take over the game in a way that you just don't see out of a lot of other AP junglers. I think Brand is just kind of a better version of Zyra right now. I know some people are going to talk about, some minor things that Zyra maybe does a bit better, but Brand has a pretty good jungle clear, and he's a lot more useful, in my opinion, in front-to-back 5v5 fights. He's going to be a lot more consistent, especially in the 3v3s when you're getting around these objectives in the mid-game. I think Brand is just really strong, almost undervalued. I think the LPL has kind of figured that out. We'll see more of him as we continue to go along in the week, but Tarzan was awesome on him in game 1, and then the guy came out and completely trolled in game number 2. Didn't even use Karthus passive. What is he doing? Jokes aside, he was also awesome in game number 2. This just was a really good series from Tarzan. I think if he can stay consistent, that's always going to be a bit of a problem with Weibo Gaming, but if Tarzan can just kind of fill that role of being that AP carry, that facilitator coming out of the jungle, maybe even be like an active resource guy for this team like he's never really been in his career, I think that could be positive. He is somebody that I think could increase the value of this team by a lot, and even if I don't necessarily like Weibo's decision to go and get rid of Xiao Hao to bring Tarzan in, Tarzan is the better player, and this is the kind of performance you were looking out for. I think the bot lane also deserves a lot of credit. Crisp, in particular, is just really freaking good at League of Legends. I don't know how many games we have to play in order for Crisp to start getting the recognition he deserves. He's a former world champion for a reason, and I get that title doesn't necessarily mean that you are good now. In fact, I'm one of the big people to push back on that argument where it's like, yeah, somebody could have been good and they could be bad now, but Crisp has continued to be one of the best supports in the world over the past few years, and people just kind of forget about that because he wasn't good at Worlds in 2023. It really is such a simple mindset sometimes where it's like, oh, international performance bad means players bad. Crisp has been one of the best supports in the world very consistently, and he was awesome again here, specifically on the Braum in game 2, setting everything up for the rest of the team. Light did a great job of being able to capitalize on that. Ashe is so strong right now. I'm surprised this champion is not getting pick and banned more in the LPL and everywhere across the world. To me, she's clearly the best AD carry in the game, but I understand that not every team is going to be able to play around Ashe in that same kind of way, but Light, really good here. Xiao, who definitely had his best series of the year. We'll talk about Shanks in a second, but Shanks was horrible in these 2 games, and that definitely opened up room for Xiaohu to feel a lot more comfortable, and Breathe, I think, was fine as well. But Tarzan, Crisp, Light really stepping up. Tarzan and Crisp, definitely the 2 that stood out for me as the 2 best players, and that's really good to see. For AL, not really the ideal place to lose your first series of the year. Certainly didn't want it to be 0-2, but losing to Weibo is not the worst thing in the entire world. This team has the talent to beat most teams in the LPL, and so losing to them certainly isn't some horrible underperformance. I think my concern is the fact that really nobody on this team played well. Nobody you can look at and be like, they were at least okay. They at least tried this series. It was kind of a team gap across all 5 positions. Basically, everybody underperformed. Dud of the series, pretty obviously to me, is going to go to Shanks in the mid lane, and this is what I was talking about. Everybody's talking about him like an MVP level player, and it's because his upside is MVP level, but man, he has to clean this kind of stuff up. He will be so good in the games that he wins, and when he loses so much harder than any other mid laner in the region, or he's right there with any other mid in terms of how hard he loses. It's really, really frustrating to try and evaluate him as a player because the dichotomy between the good and the bad games is just so large. It's so different, and it's really hard to get an idea of which Shanks you're going going to expect on any given game, because he played amazing earlier this week. He's been playing great for this team at the start of the split, but this is unacceptable. This is him getting rolled by a player who is like really underperforming right now in Xiaohu. So not good from Shanks. It's not like the rest of this team played better. Ale and Krako were both completely outclassed. Krako very nearly got done of the series for me, but I do think his game 2 is at least better than Shanks's. Hope and Kale didn't really do anything. I'm not going to try and pin the blame on them, but Crisp was definitely better than Kale in basically every facet, and Light absolutely had more to work with than Hope did. This was just not a good series from AL. They got outplayed basically across the map, but again, it's one series. I'm never going to judge a team by one series. If you've looked super good up until this point and really underperform in one small, case, then I'm not going to sit here and say that you're bad by any means, but there are things on this team that would lead me to believe that this kind of inconsistency is potentially something to worry about when it comes to AL. Shanks and Krako in particular have notoriously been inconsistent. So hopefully they can figure things out, but this is a really big win for Weibo. If they can keep this momentum going, like this is huge to get them into that top 3. This is not an easy group to get in the top 3 out of, especially with Ultra Prime playing well at the current moment. I think that Weibo definitely should be favorites. I kept them in that top 3 projected to get out of this group, and this is a really good kind of reassurance of that they still will be a team to get out of this group in top 3, but nothing is set in stone, even for a team like AL. And moving on to our second series of day number 4, and it's a 2-0 battle in Group B. It's Team WE taking on Bilibili Gaming, and BLG is going to pick up the 2-1 win. They're going to stay undefeated. Unfortunately, WE will move to 2-1, but they won a game here, and honestly, if they had a bot lane that was remotely competent, they could have won this series. It truly was that close, and that's not a slight to BLG. It really is just a plus to how well certain members of WE are playing right now. This is just not a complete team. I hate to say it, their offseason moves made them significantly worse. I really believe in this team. I really believe in the core of their players. Their solo laners do a lot of interesting things. We'll talk about Wayward, maybe not so much in this series, but Fofo is playing out of his mind. He's playing like an MVP favorite right now, and the bot lane is just not good enough to be able to keep up. We will get to that, but for Bilibili, thank God they had the bot gap in this series, because there were some problems elsewhere across the map. It's funny, we talked about the first series of the week, how Bin was the one to kind of salvage them to 1v9, to really keep them in that series and not let LGD take a game off of them, to keep them undefeated, at least leading up into game number 1 here. Well, Bin was the one to kind of really set them back, I would say, throughout a lot of the rest of this series. He was not particularly strong. Lucky for him, the rest of this team was kind of doing their job. Elk in particular is going to get player of the series. He is locked and he is loaded. Really good back half of the series for Elk. The Jhin in game 2 looked dominant. Jhin in general in the LPL looked super good this week. Basically everyone who played him looked like they could carry games on their own, and that's a really good sign for a champion that I think is really valuable in the meta right now. So nice to see that, but Elk looking really solid. The aggressiveness, the aggressive tendencies, I guess you could say, of Elk are back, and, he looks comfortable. All you need him to feel is comfortable. If he's playing his style, if he's playing his way, he was the best AD carry in the LPL in spring, and I don't even think it was really all that close. There was a real argument to be made that he was the best AD carry in the world in the spring split. I made that argument. I thought he was the best AD carry in the world in the spring split, and, if he's going to be able to play even remotely like that here in summer, it's going to be just fine for BLG. I also think Knight played a lot better here in the second series of the week. Clearly, struggled a bit in the first series, and Fofo was clearly on his A game today as well, which we will get into, but Knight very much willing to match. I think the Annie in game 3 was definitely kind of the difference maker. If they didn't have that ability to just, press start on a lot of these fights to get that really nice flank angle, if Knight wasn't nearly as proactive in terms of the ways that he was looking to engage on that champion, I think things would have been a lot more difficult. But Knight, Elk, definitely the standouts here. I thought Shun was fine. Scoreline probably a bit better than maybe he individually played, but still fine. Bin could have been a bit better. I think On could have been a bit better as well. That's maybe nitpicking. I think generally speaking, On was fine. But BLG, better series, all things considered, than their first series against LGD, even if they did drop a game here. And then for WE, man, Fofo is playing really well right now. He was player of the week across the entire LPL in week number 1. Truly was terrific in their first week, their undefeated first week, and he was awesome here against BLG. I think with a better team around him, Fofo just would have been able to win this series. I'm not going to say on his own, but he certainly would have had a shot. Unfortunately, this bot lane just didn't hold up their own end of the bargain. I think with a better AD carry, this might have even been a 2-0. Like, it really could have been that easy. LP is is an easy choice for dead of the series. He's just not good enough. I know I was really harsh and critical of this move when it happened in the offseason, but I have been nothing but vindicated on that decision throughout this split so far. It's still early, so I'm not going to sit here and say that he's going to be horrible. In, 2 of their 3 series, though, including their first series against RNG, LP has been a disappointment. Remember, that first series that they were able to win comfortably, Fofo and Wayward absolutely dominated, and LP lost to Huanfeng in lane both games, and LP has continued to be a pretty big negative for WE. He single-handedly lost some team fights for them. He was losing in lane. He gave Elk so many resources and so much gold. Again, if they had anybody who could survive on that side of the map, this probably would have been a lot closer of a series, but LP was pretty bad. Mark generally was fine. I don't think he was nearly as big of a problem. Wayward's scoreline looks horrible, but he had a couple of really impactful plays. He just died a lot because he was on his own inside lanes. It happens with Wayward. You have to live with that. Hang also just doesn't really understand tempo, at least right now. Like, the Zyra somehow was able to be the most effective pick that he had. Some really good fights from him. I think that his ability to actually go toe-to-toe with BLG in terms of the front-to-back was pretty solid, but again, the tempo in the early game really just off. Fofo was the 1v9 guy here for WE, and he has been phenomenal at the start of this year. Truly an MVP-like caliber performance so far through their first 3 series, but BLG was better across everything. Knight, Elk, definitely the stars, the standouts, but BLG in general I think just felt a lot more cohesive, even with the loss in game number 1. These are positive signs, and, I know that it hasn't been the cleanest 3-0 to start this year off in terms of their record, but, the record is really all that matters at the end of the day. I'm not really all that worried about BLG ramping up towards things that matter more. I have a feeling this team is going to be just fine, and so far, even with some of the rough patches, they have been in terms of their wins. But then now moving on to day number 5, and we kick day 5 off with a battle between 2 teams looking for their first game win of the split. It's RNG taking on LGD Gaming, and even in LGD's state, where they are clearly kind of returning back down to earth after overperforming a lot in spring, they still are better than RNG, it would seem. The RNG experiment has failed on every single level. They can't even decide who they want to play in their lineup. They go out in the offseason to get ZDZ, they bench him after only 2 series. Yes, they brought him back in for games 2 and 3, but they benched him for game number 1, which was certainly not ideal until Juice was clearly just not good enough to start for them. They are throwing stuff at the wall, and none of it is sticking currently. This elite-level organization that has really never experienced an underperformance like this is now being stuck at the bottom of the ladder. They were number 14 on my power rankings. You can bet that they are going to go down after a performance like this. This is not a top anything team in the league. This is a bottom 2 or 3 team in the LPL at the current moment. They cannot win no matter what their configuration is. So we'll go ahead and talk about it. For LGD, they looked really good, at least in their wins. In their loss, I would have preferred that they didn't lose to RNG, but this is still not a particularly good team. They just got lucky that they got a group with an even worse team in RNG, so that's good for them. Haichao is still really solid. He's going to get player of the series here. His glow up this year, I think, has been probably the most promising and fun thing to watch when it comes to LGD. He's become one of the most intriguing mids on like a bad team in the league. There are quite a few really good mid laners that are unfortunately stuck on teams that are just not going to perform particularly well this year, but Haichao might be at the top of that list at the current moment. He truly has been a game wrecker for LGD, somebody who I'm looking at for a potential, signing next year for a better team, like somebody that could absolutely move up the peg at least a little bit, move up to a team like WE, around that area and continue to be as effective as he is. Maybe he's never going to be a top tier mid laner at this level, but he could be a top 7 or a top 8 mid laner at this level. He might already be a top 7 or top 8 mid laner at this level. He has played really well. It's just always been about the surrounding core, which has not been particularly good. It was fine here, though. Jinzhao, a scoreline looks whatever, but he was by far the better support in this series. It's really funny. When this team wins, Jinzhao is often looking pretty good. I laugh at Jinzhao a lot because he's that prototypical example of, like, I'm going to play so well in 5 games this year, and the other 25 that I play, I'm going to be so horrible. And there's just no middle ground. Like, there is absolutely no in-between when it comes to him. And it is what it is, right? When he engages and he's, playing with tempo and the team is ahead, he actually looks really solid as a support. He clearly understands that part of the game, and I think he's developed a lot over the course of the last few years in this role because of that, but he cannot play from behind. Like, he just does not have the skill to do it. He does not have the mechanics, he does not have the mental awareness, he does not have the experience at the position to do it, and so you got to get him a lead, but if you get him a lead, he's pretty interesting, and he can do stuff. He's just not ever going to be consistent at any level. It's why he's always been ranked near the bottom of supports, even if he has had good games. Xiaoye was actually good here. I think that that's something to keep in mind. Xiaoye was inserted into the lineup. I don't even think I said that in in their first series of the week. Xiaoya is in here for Kepler because Kepler was so bad in their first series. I agree. You got to go with Xiaoya. He has significantly more upside, and honestly, his floor is a bit higher too. And this is a good example as to why he at the very least can play whatever the meta AD carries are right now. And Huanfeng continues to be fine on RNG, we'll get to that, but Xiaoya was better. He did a good job capitalizing on what Jin Zhao was creating. Meteor was fine, was maybe not as good as his scoreline would indicate. That game 2 on Nidalee was horrible, but the rest of the series was generally fine. When he got to play Graves, his signature champion, he did well, and then Bertle, not a star or anything, at least in this series, he was just kind of there. But Haichao, Jin Zhao, Xiaoya, kind of the carries for LGD. Haichao looks so good for this team. And then for RNG, there's just nothing else left to talk about. I was kind of laughing in my primer video, as I'm sure people who have watched it will remember, that people were ranking RNG as a team they projected to get out of their group purely because there's no way they underperformed twice. Like, I thought that was pretty crazy. I think I had them at 13 or 12 in terms of my power rankings. I thought they would be better. I thought they would be competitive, but they had a lot to prove to me that they were going to be a playoff team by any stretch of the imagination, and honestly, they've been even worse than I was anticipating, let alone what all of these people who said they were going to get out of the group were anticipating. This team is just not good enough to win games, let alone to compete for a playoff spot. Ming is horrible. He's going to get done of the series once again. There's just nothing else to say. He was horrible in spring, and people were like, LWX was really garbage. Maybe he just had to play with a really bad AD carry. Maybe it'll be better as we go into summer, but his AD carry has been upgraded, like, by every conceivable metric. Huanfeng is by far the best player on this team, at least at the current moment, and Ming has continued to be horrible. He has continued to be a non-playable support for this team. I don't know what happened in that break that he had last year, but whatever it is, it clearly is not working out in 2024. I honestly would be looking to move in a different direction. Just promote anybody from the LDL. At least they're an unknown. Ming right now cannot play. He's not adept at this meta. He does not feel comfortable playing in this meta, and he has not been a passable LPL player so far in 2024. Tong Yuan was back in. They clearly just wanted to protect him against Knight. I have no idea why. Like, whatever, man. Tong Yuan is so bad. Like, he is not playable at this level. Haichao completely embarrassed him, especially in that third and final game. Just never was remotely relevant. Wei was fine. Honestly, probably Wei's best series of the year, including spring. He's not been particularly good for this team, but he was very good in game 2 on the Viego. Was actually able to get a champion that he could snowball out of control and just kind of win the game on his own in terms of the team fights. He's not really been given a lot of help. Maybe I'm too harsh on Wei, but I think he's just an average jungler at this point. He looks like a below average jungler because of the performances of the rest of this team, but there are highlights in terms of his game. He's just not consistent at all. Juice, ZDZ, whoever's playing on the top side, they were generally fine, not nearly the problem, but not consistent at all. And Huanfeng continues to look good. Like, I think on a better team, Huanfeng would continue to kind of cement himself as a starting caliber ADC. I've been on the Huanfeng train in terms of why isn't he starting for Thunder Talk for a little while. He got the spot here on RNG, and he feels elo held in his first ever split on this team. Wei is kind of there with him, but man, RNG is just not good. This is right now a bottom 2, bottom 3 team in the league at the very best, and that's really not a good look for them. But for LGD, maybe they're not bottom 2, maybe they are bottom 3, like maybe that's how this ends up working out. Maybe you have 2 of the 3 worst teams in the league in the same group. I think that's very possible here in Group B, but at the very least, they were able to pick up a win against an RNG team really struggling. And then moving on to our second series of day number 5, another upset. A crazy week here in the LPL as we saw Invictus Gaming taking on Ninjas in Pyjamas. And IG picks up the 2-1 series win. NIP can also not find any sort of consistency in this group. Weibo Gaming can't find any. We figured that out in week number 1. Anyone's Legend just lost to Weibo Gaming, and that certainly doesn't put a big lump of confidence in me about them. And now here's NIP, the other team that's supposed to get out of this group, losing to what I had been calling the worst team in the LPL by a pretty considerable margin. At least none of those other teams lost to Invictus, but here we are. IG picking up a win here against NIP, and things are wide open in Group D, and that includes for a team like Ultra Prime, who's probably loving all the confusion and chaos that is happening right now. It's only benefiting them, but we'll talk about that as we get further into kind of the discussion of where these teams are at. Player of the series for me is going to go to On in the bot lane. Sometimes I feel really bad that this guy is stuck on Invictus Gaming, an org that clearly does not want to put a lot of money or effort into running their League of Legends team, but then you just go, okay, well, this is the opportunity for him to be the #1 guy on a team. He's really not been the #1 guy ever since 2023 spring. It's kind of been a little bit of a back and forth effort to try and get him the resources that we know he can use to carry games, and he got those resources here. He was awesome in this series, was great in both of their wins. Kalista, Kaisa, it doesn't really matter. He can kind of play a bit of everything. There was a time period where him and Wink as a duo were kind of a top 5 bot lane in the LPL, at least for a short period of time in spring of last year. I think some people forget just how good they were in that stretch, and I think some people forget just the kind of upside that On can have. I think if you can get something out of Vampire, and we'll talk about that in a second, Vampire actually had a really good week, all things considered, especially in comparison to anything he's shown at the LPL level up until this point, then On can be a primary guy for this team. He can win you some games. They're not going to be a playoff team with that, but, he can go and do something, and he can prove that he belongs here in the LPL, which I think he's done before, but there was some worry that he would get lost in the shuffle on this team. I think this game kind of alleviated at least some of those fears for me, but like I said, Vampire looking pretty okay in this series. This is definitely the best week he's ever had as a pro. He was horrible for EDG, and quite frankly, he was horrible in week number 1. He was my dud of the week across the entire LPL. In week number 1, I see a lot of people online being like, this is what happens when you get Vampire off of EDG, and I can kind of understand that, but that's almost intentionally ignoring what happened in the first week here, where he was just unplayably bad once again. It was really nice to see him bounce back here, but the bar is in hell. Like, the expectations are so low for Vampire that him just existing and making a good play every once in a while is like, oh my god, he's doing something. Like, that's the expectation. So, I'm not going to freak out about Vampire just yet. I've seen some people that are really high on him. I hope he does well, because he has been grossly mishandled as a young prospect. Like, his development track has been completely destroyed by EDG, and, he really got shoved into a situation that he never should have been in the first place. I don't blame him as the player. I blame the orgs and being the ones that put him in that position, but he is starting to figure something out at the very least. I think playing with On, the best AD carry he's definitely ever played with, will definitely help that. I think GLFS definitely bounced back well. Aki was bad in this series, and we'll get to that in a second, but GLFS much better than whatever he was in that first series. Really nice to see that. Nenny continues to come along, especially as kind of that facilitative mid. He's never really going to be somebody that I expect to carry, but Renekton, Galio, like, that calls back to his top lane days, he can be kind of the bruiser mid that plays for jungle, that plays for the rest of the map. I think he can exist in that role and be valuable. Julian's still not good. I'm still not sold on him as an LPL top laner. Like, Shanji was definitely better in this series, but the rest of the team was generally fine. GLFS and On are definitely the two that I'm expecting to carry. Nenny, I think, could theoretically be a positive for this team, and Vampire, he showed something this week. Like, there are upside pieces here on Invictus. I don't expect this to be something that they can continue. This might be their only win of the group stage, but at least they were able to, at the very least, get one win. And then for NIP on the other side, man, they really do live and die by Rookie, don't they? Like, this is Rookie's team, and he's either playing well and they win the game, or he has that LeBlanc game in game 3 and they lose the series. It really just kind of, it all hinges on the performances that he himself gives as a player. It's really funny how it goes in that regard. Rookie was fine, I would say, generally in the first 2 games. The Talia, the Yone even was generally okay. Maybe you wanted to see a bit more out of the Yone, but he was going into Renekton. Really not a lot he can do in that circumstance, but he was so horrible on the LeBlanc in Game 3, and they put so many resources into getting him to win the game that he's going to get dud of the series for me. I think you could realistically give this to Aki or Zhuo as well. Aki cannot play AP junglers, which is a bit of a problem because that is the meta right now. He's a lot more comfortable on his tank engagers, and that's kind of always been his thing, and so, the meta's not necessarily in his direction. I think he is a bit meta-dependent as a jungler, and that's a bit disappointing to see. It doesn't feel like he's adapted very well to this new meta. Zhuo was not good in this series at all. That Nautilus game in Game 3 was brutal, and the Rel was not too much better in Game 2, but I don't think that he was as bad as Rookie was in that third game, which is why he's not getting done of the series. But the big problem that NIP is running into is that when Rookie doesn't win, they don't really have anybody else that can carry games. Shanji is playing well, and he was the better top laner in this series. I'm not going to blame Shanji. He's honestly probably the best player on NIP right now, but Fodic has really regressed back to what he was in the previous splits. His scorelines look good, his KDA looks good, but there is absolutely no effort or impact on the Rift. He is a complete non-factor if the team is not funneling resources into him. Aki is not in meta. Zhuo looks like he's reverted back to what he was in 2021 and 2022 for top esports. Rookie is a bit feast or famine, more than expected, and that's really going to hurt NIP's upside. Them being 500 is definitely a bit disappointing with how inconsistent the rest of this group has been. They have to get better than this. I still think they can, but so much of their game revolves around that mid lane, revolves around Rookie winning, that if it doesn't happen, I don't really see an avenue for them to be relevant in any consistent way. And then, again, nice win for IG. On is super good, and I'm hoping that, if IG does end up leaving the league like is kind of proposed after this year, I hope On isn't stuck in like contract purgatory where he just can't find a team, because he absolutely deserves to be in the LPL, as was proven here. And, there are other interesting pieces on this team. I'm just not sure if this is going to be entirely replicable against teams that aren't quite as one-dimensional as NIP. That being said, Group D is wide open, and even a team like Invictus could probably find success here, so it'll be interesting to see what happens, but a nice win for a team I didn't see coming. Then moving on now to day number 6, our penultimate day here in week number 2, and we kicked it off with a Group A matchup between LGD Gaming and ThunderTalk Gaming that EDG is going to win. That's a 2-0 week for EDG, and that is exactly what the doctor ordered. Picking up wins against FPX and ThunderTalk is necessary in order for this team to be considered the second best in this group, and I think that that has become incredibly realistic for them. Honestly, they are big favorites, in my opinion, now to be the second best team in this group, not only because of this win against ThunderTalk, but how good a lot of this team is looking, how consistent a lot of this team is looking right now, because they are looking really good. They're not just beating bad players, they are doing a lot of the things that make me feel excited that this team can consistently generate leads. Now, that's not to say that they are perfect. Their team fighting definitely still needs a lot of work. Leave in particular can just get a little bit too trigger happy sometimes in terms of their 5v5s, but for the most part, like, this is a good team. This is a team that should be top 10 if everything continues to go right, which is such a far cry from whatever they were in the spring split, where they were one of the worst teams in the LPL, one of the worst teams in the world, quite frankly. It's just a massive glow up, and it's trusting the process. Player of the series, it's going to go to Solo Kill in the top lane. What a week from Solo Kill. Genuinely one of the best players in the LPL in week number 2. I did not see that one coming. I know Hoya is kind of like an absolute nothing as an opponent in the top lane, and I'm certainly not going to try and sit here and say that he was perfect. He got to play whatever the hell is going on in FPX right now in terms of all of that chaotic nature, and then Hoya as his 2 opponents, and so I'm not going to, try and tell you that Solo Kill is somehow going to be like a top 5 top laner in the league or anything, but this was a really good week from a player that we really haven't seen a lot of at the LPL level. I was actually pretty excited to see him get a full split. He was one of the rookies coming up for EDG that I was most excited to see get more time. It was him and obviously the Snake that I thought made good developments over the course of the spring split, but Solo Kill is the one to continue to get a starting spot, and he was spectacular here. And, some people are just going to say, oh, he picked K'Sante and Skarner. Of course he looked really good going into a bad top laner. Well, it's not really that simple. We've seen players int on those 2 champions over the course of this week quite frequently. There are a lot of bad top laners in the LPL, more than some people are going to give them credit for, and Solo Kill does not look like he is going to be one of them at the current moment. He looks like he's actually going to be kind of a positive for EDG as a whole, which is a really good thing to say. I also want to give a huge shout out to Wink. Wink is so freaking good. What a massive addition. I think Cryan obviously has been very good for this team at the start of the split, and we'll talk about him in a second, but Wink was their biggest acquisition in the middle of the year here. His ability to just completely stop time in the bot lane, like to completely slow the pace of the game down, allow his AD carries to just do the things that matter the most, and really make their job a lot easier. It's unparalleled. Like, obviously his time as an AD carry has clearly helped him in that role, but he is just way better in that role than he has any right to be. He was really bad as a support his first couple of splits. He has really become one of the most consistent supports in the entire league, and that's really fun to watch. He was awesome here. Mega gapped his own support on the other side of the matchup here. Leave was fine. His scoreline looks good. Again, some mistakes in teamfights that he is going to have to clean up. He has not been the Leave that he was in spring of last year. Like, that's just not going to be there anymore. It doesn't feel like that Leave still exists. It doesn't feel like that is going to be realistic to expect out of him anymore, but he is still a player that I think can do some damage. He's the player I think the least of right now on this team, but I still think that can improve. I think this team has a good problem in the fact that the Snake was making developments at the end of spring, and that Leave was clearly the one to win this job in the mid-season, so that's a good problem to have. Jeja and Cryan, I think, are fine, but Solo Kill looking really good, and Wink, a superb pickup, genuinely, for EDG. Really something that could change the outlook of their entire year. And then for ThunderTalk, not a good team. Like, they're going to be in this cluster at the bottom of the standings as well. Part of that can be kind of chalked up to the fact that Group A has turned out to be pretty good, with EDG actually being a good team. But ThunderTalk is just not good. Like, I get it that the group is hard. It's just, they're not solid. They don't really have the fundamentals. They make a lot of mistakes, and it's not the same kinds of mistakes that they were making in the spring split. In spring, it was Beishuan just really being bad for this team, not generating any early pressure, and them not really being able to go anywhere with that because they were losing so frequently early. Now it's just Hoya, and it's the support position. It's whoever is in that support position. Chocho was horrible in week 1. They put Feather in for that second series. Feather was also really bad for this team. Chocho comes back in here because Feather was bad and Chocho continues to be bad. He's going to get dud of the series again. All 3 of their losses, the support has been getting dud of the series. It doesn't matter who's in that position. It feels like it is a black hole right now. 1xN is really struggling because of it. He has been essentially useless throughout the entirety of this split. I really did not agree with this team's decision to bench Quanfong for 1xN. That has aged particularly well, even if 1xN does have some potential. He's not the kind of player that can, bring up a bad situation, which is what this ThunderTalk situation is right now. Yukao continues to be fine, but he's he's not really the game breaker he was last year. You know, there were times where it was like, oh, UCal's like a top 5 mid laner in the LPL. I had him ranked as such going into this split because I really did value him so highly. He's really not been that kind of guy. I know it feels weird to say that because everything else is going wrong around him, and he's really not been the problem for this team, and you can maybe chalk it up to him just being mentally, like, checked out, but there were situations like this last split where UCal was at least showing kind of the potential that he could be on a great team, like on a top team. We're really not seeing that right now out of him. Beishuan has been better, which I think is a good sign, if not, you know, just a little bit okay. Like, he's been average in the jungle, which I think you can live with, but top lane is a disaster. Hoya continues to be one of the worst top laners in the LPL. Again, bot lane is kind of a disaster for this team, and if both of those things end up being true, this team is not going to be competitive in any way that they want to be. Thunder Talk is clearly the worst team in Group A, and that's a bit disappointing to say, but for EDG, yeah, they feel like a top 2 team in this group. They feel like a top 10 team in the LPL. I really do think they're on the upward trajectory, which is really good. Solo Kill looks great. Wink looks incredible, and Jeje, I think, is having a really good start to the split. If Leave can just settle in and be good enough for them to be able to win games, I think EDG could actually be a sneakily very good team, especially come playoff time. And then moving on to our second series of day number 6, and we're staying in Group A as we see FunPlus Phoenix taking on JD Gaming, and JDG is rightfully going to pick up their 2-0 win here. They should be able to beat a team like FPX, Problems or not. They would have been favorites going into the series regardless of the situation when it came to that, but especially with everything going on, to see this team come out and play the way that they did here in this series is a good sign. Kanavi in particular has just been absolutely tearing it up so far. He has been phenomenal to start this split. He's been phenomenal every single year of his career outside of 2021. It's really the only time I can remember him just being anything other than one of the best junglers in the entire world. He is awesome. Like, I am all in on Kanavi for the rest of time. This guy's the best jungler in the world. That might be a controversial statement. I think a lot of people are going to want to put Canyon in that position, but I think if Kanavi was in Canyon's shoes, I think he would be doing just as well, if not better than Canyon. That's how highly I view Kanavi. I'm not trying to put down Canyon. I'm not trying to make that some sort of negative statement. I just want to kind of express how highly I view Kanavi. Like, that is just how good he is as a player. He's going to get player of the series once again here. He's going to be a favorite to win MVP once again. Like, every single split he's in, he's going to be favored to win MVP because that's just who he is as a player. He can be a facilitator. Hell, he picked Vi in game number 1 and still carried it. Like, he can do whatever you want him to do. The guy is absolutely ridiculous. Clearly the best player on JDG. I feel like going into the year, that was a little bit up for debate with Ruler and Missing, specifically Ruler, but that is not up for debate anymore. Like, Kanavi is the best player on JDG. He's the driving force for what this team does, and he really is taking over. Like, he is the best jungler in the world, in my opinion. Also worth noting, Flandre was out here, Sheer was in for this series. I'm not sure if that's going to be a consistent thing. It was super inconsistent last split when they put Sheer in, why they put Sheer in, like when they wanted to take Flandre out. I hope Sheer stays in. A little selfishly, these games are way more fun with Sheeran because he's so much more bloodthirsty. Like, he's going to be willing to fight in the top lane all the time. That's just kind of who he is as a player, and Sheer is really talented. He can get away with a lot. He's not Vampire in terms of this player that was clearly just not ready for this level, was plucked out of solo queue and given an opportunity that he just wasn't prepared for. Like, he is clearly ready for this level. There was a reason JDG plucked him out of solo queue and said, like, oh, like, we got to play him now. Like, he is too good to sit on the bench and do nothing. That's a really big compliment towards him, and he has been great basically every opportunity he has been given. He has been excellent. So Sheer continuing to look great. I think Ruler and Missing looked really good here as well. Ruler going deathless, Missing was fine. Yagao's team fighting is exceptional. Like, I know that he's not the most mechanically talented mid laner, and I'm honestly one of the first people to kind of disrespect Yagao because I am somebody that has been, you know, on record being like, how do I have to defend Knight? Like, why am I sitting here having to defend Knight? From people who think that, you know, BLG downgraded going from Yagao to Knight, you know, it's been a little bit of a weird thing, but it's meant no disrespect towards Yagao. Yagao is a very good player. He's just good for his own thing. He's very technically sound in terms of knowing where to be at the right time and macro-wise being in the right place. I think that he has been a big value to JDG, just not as much as Knight would have been. Yagao's still a very good player, though, especially when you get to those 5v5 team fights. That's where he really excels as a player. He makes Kanavi's job a whole lot easier, as he did in 2022 when he had the best year of his career. Yagao was an asset to this team. I think Yagao and Kanavi were actually the standouts for me here. Ruler and Missing continuing to look good, and Sheer was definitely, you know, a fun surprise in the top lane to see when this series started, but Kanavi's the guy. He is the carry. He is the MVP candidate. candidate on this team, and he's going to be the one to dictate just how far JDG can go. And then for FPX on the other side of this, you know, just kind of standard FPX loss. I would love to sit here and chalk this up to the problems that they're having, and I think a lot of people are going to do that, but this is how they lost in the spring split. Honestly, this was a pretty familiar circumstance for FPX, which is just, we don't have the firepower to compete with the best teams in the world. Like, we don't have the same kind of talent that they do. Milky Way is going to get done of the series. A lot of people online have been like, what happened to Milky Way going in between spring and summer? Like, Milky Way's fallen off so hard. This series in particular, at least I can speak on that, Milky Way has never been good against the best junglers in the league. Like, that was never a thing that Milky Way did, is beat Kanavi. Like, the thing about Milky Way is when he can mechanically outplay you when his tempo is just too much for the enemy jungler to handle, which is quite a lot of junglers at this level, he's just going to crush you. Like, there's going to be no remains. Like, he is going to completely sweep that game, and it's not going to be particularly close. But when you go into a jungler that not only has good early game tempo, but can contest you in a lot of these fights, mechanically speaking, Milky Way doesn't really have, like, another playstyle. He is very one-dimensional in that regard, which is why I have always said that FPX is inherently limited with Milky Way as their best player. It's why I predicted them to not win a playoff series last split, and why I was correct in that regard, is that Milky Way is pretty one-dimensional, and players like Kanavi are just too good to fall for that trap. And so Milky Way's struggling here, as he typically has against the best junglers in the league, but it's not like his laners did him any favors. Care and Xiao Lao both really struggled here. Xiao Lao, again, I'm gonna excuse a bit considering everything that's been happening this week, but Care was horrible here, just got completely outplayed by Yagao. Dectum and Life were generally fine. Dectum continues to kind of be a stabilizing force for this team, but he's not a star. He's not gonna win games that the rest of this team is losing. He's a good secondary piece, but FPX just, again, do not have the firepower to compete with a team like JDG. I don't even know if they have the firepower to compete with a team like LGD Gaming right now, because it just doesn't feel like they're clicking. I think if Milky Way can get back into form, this team can win any game. That's how Milky Way operates. He's talented enough to be able to carry them to any kind of win, to any kind of success. The problem is that it's just not going to be all that consistent, and against teams like JDG, when they have players like Kanavi on the other side of the rift, you're just not going to get that version of Milky Way all that regularly, because JDG is that good. Kanavi is that good. Again, I don't want to undersell anybody else on this team. I want to oversell Kanavi. That's my goal. That's my job here, is to tell you just how good he is, because as somebody who watches League of Legends everywhere in the world, as somebody who covers every region, there just aren't players like Kanavi anywhere else. Like, he is a once-in-a-generation type of jungle player. He is one of the best junglers of all time, and he continues to play in his prime. He is so fun to watch when he is on, and JDG really is a blast when he gets to control the game. But that's going to bring us to our 7th and final day of LPL action here in week number 2. I appreciate you sticking around if you've made it this far. It means a lot that you're enjoying the video, but finalizing our week number 2, kicking off day number 7, it's a matchup between Rare Atom and LNG Esports that LNG is going to pick up a much-needed win in. This was starting to look dire for them. They end up picking up a win to get themselves back to 500 in terms of their series score. They go above 500 in terms of their game score again. Much needed for them. Rare Atom really wanted to win this one, but man, I'm going to be honest, neither team actually wanted to win this one in terms of how the games actually played out. This was a macro disaster, I would say, from both of them. Neither team looking particularly strong, I would say, in this one, as we got a bit of a disaster class, especially down the stretch of game number 1, where I don't know how you lose that if you're RA, and hell, I don't know how game 2 ends as quickly as it does, but either way, LNG is going to feel very grateful to walk out of this with a 2-0 win, especially with how things have been going this year. They still have very real problems to fix. This team is certainly not solved by any means, but they just want to get into that top group. They don't want to have to guarantee themselves a play-in spot. This team wants to be in the playoffs, even if they're going to struggle a lot in Group A. Even if they get obliterated, at least they'll have that cushion of being a Group A team once it comes to the play-in series. So they're definitely looking for that, and this win puts them in that direction. Player of the series pretty obviously is going to go to Weibo in the jungle. This is kind of what we wanted to see from Weibo. We wanted to see this meta become one where he just played a lot more active in it. I know obviously Spring was a weird meta for jungle. I think it's weirder now, but honestly I think that helps Weibo. He's allowed to play things like Karthus and just kind of run it down for a bit while also doing 1 billion damage and being very influential in team fights. And then Ivern is honestly not something I would have expected Weibo to really succeed at, not because it's more of a supportive pick, but just because of the tempo of when that champion ends up being relevant. I don't think it really plays into his idea of wanting to fight 3v3 a lot, which is something that he really excelled on when he was on Weibo last year. Either way, it ends up working out here. Xiao Hao was not nearly as good, and I'm not going to blame Xiao Hao. He was the one player on RA that was actually trying, but Weiwei actually did pretty well, and I'm happy to say that. I think that there were some positives to take away from Gala's performance. Again, I'm really not going to give up on Gala. I feel pretty good about who he is as a player. Feel pretty good about what we expect from him for the rest of the year. Even if this team is not performing, any given time, I think Gala can step up. As long as the rest of the lanes are working, I think Gala's going to be just fine. Hong, I was a bit concerned about, but this was a much better series, a pretty big support gap, and a pretty big bot gap in general. From LNG in this series, they were definitely the better bot lane. Not surprising, but good to see. Scout, though, man, he's got to clean some things up. Malzahar in game number 1, a weird quirky game in game number 2. Scout is really feeling very uncomfortable right now. And again, I don't know how much of it is just the composition of this team where he has a role that he's never really had in his career, or at least not one that he's had successfully in his career, as kind of this like super fast-paced mid laner, somebody who needs to skirmish a lot in the early game. It's not really something that he's ever done at a high level, and clearly they don't want to go in that direction with their drafts, but Weiwei is going to kind of initiate a lot of those plays anyways because that's who he is as a jungler. Scout having to play out of role, I would say. I know it's still mid lane, but out of like comfortability, I think has hurt his performance, but still there are a lot of mechanical problems that Scout has right now, and his laning has gone down a lot. I'm starting to get concerned about Scout, especially coming off of the best year of his entire career. For him to be so bad so far in 2024, it's just a little bit disappointing. There's really no other way to say that. Zika was fine, certainly didn't make mistakes, but Weiwei carried here. Gala and Hong definitely were kind of resource generators down in the bot lane, and those three really pushed LNG over the top. And then for RA, horrible macro. Like, what else is there really to say? This team might have some skill, but they do not have finesse. That is something that they clearly do not have. They are either going to brute force their way into a win, or they are going to lose. And unfortunately for this one, they just ended up losing. Done of the series was kind of difficult because two players, I think, very much earned it. I'm going to give it to Xiaoshu in the top lane. The Skarner, the Kennen, neither looked particularly good. And quite frankly, by the end of game 2, he was just done. He was just running it down mid. He was A-ramming it and just killing himself, hoping the game would end sooner. I don't really know what his plan was, but he was clearly mentally boomed or tilted or something. I'm sure the coach had a conversation with him. It's unacceptable what happened in the back half of these games because he just quit. He gave up, and that's not acceptable. Jue was also really bad. I don't really know if that's something that we're going to see continue. Jue's actually been pretty okay for Rare Adam, I would say, at the start of this split, but he wasn't super consistent for Ultra Prime last split either, so you're kind of hoping that that consistency can improve now that he is on a quote-unquote better team. I don't know if they're a better team, I guess, but Jue is certainly someone that you want to see better out of. Assume wasn't great here. Gala was definitely better, although that's not really a shock. Vikla, Xiaohao, generally fine. I don't think they were the problems. Vikla kind of gets the blame for a lot of situations, but he's been pretty good to start this summer split. He's been winning in lane, and I think that that's definitely a positive. The 1v1 here actually was in favor of RA in the middle of the map, which you really wouldn't have anticipated. Xiaohao also was fine, but Weiwei was just a bit better, and you can kind of live with that, I guess, if you're Rare Adam. This team is already overperforming expectations. I still didn't have them in the top 10. Moving into this week, they have done a lot of really good things, and they've moved in the right direction, but I still don't think this is a very complete team, all things considered. This is going to be a team that's fighting an uphill battle to make top 10. And then for LNG, they should be a team that competes around this spot. Like, they should be winning these series 2-0, but it should be a lot easier than this. It shouldn't be quite as chaotic, and they quite frankly should look better than what they looked like here. It's nice to see Weiwei finally performing well on LNG. It feels like that had been a bit of an impossibility at the start of the year, but Gala and Hong need to step it up. Scout simply has to be better. Whatever he is doing right now is not working. This LNG team still has a long way to go, but right now their goal is to get out of this group in top 2. After that, we can figure out the rest later. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week here, our second series of day number 7, and it's a matchup between OMG and Top Esports. 0-3, 3-0. It goes as you would expect. Top Esports picking up another 2-0 win, and they have just dominated every single series that they have played so far. They are 8-0. They have never looked like they have been tested. They have been so much better in the early game than everyone that they are going up against, and yet you will still constantly from, reputable analysts hear like, oh, but this team won't survive against the best teams in the league. I get it. Like, I understand the idea of, oh, they're not tested nearly as much as maybe some other teams in the group stage, but like, there's a reason that things are so easy for them right now, and it's because their mechanical skill floor is just so much higher than almost any other team in the world. I get that there is reasons to be concerned about Top Esports, but let's kind of celebrate what this team is doing right before we just assume that they are going to completely fall off. I really hate that line of thinking, that mentality, because I think that they are doing a lot of things that deserve celebrating right now. Player of the series is once again going to go to Tian. He's playing unbelievable right now. I would not have thought that the AP jungle meta was going to be what unlocked Tian to get back to 2019 Tian, but here we are. This start to the split has been phenomenal. This week was genuinely phenomenal. He played 4 games, and he single-handedly won all 4. Again, I'm not trying to sit here and say that anybody else in this team played poorly, but there's no way you can watch any of the 4 games that Top Esports played this week and not see Tian first and foremost in every single major thing that they are doing. He really has been that good for them, and he was great in week 1 as well. He's really, really just on fire right now. It's always been a concern about whether or not he can keep it up. I know he's a bit inconsistent. There is a reason he was not an A-graded player for me going into the split, but if there was ever a split where he was going to perform like an A-graded player, it's this one, because he is just popping off game after game after game right now. He knows how to control the early game. His Lilia, his Karthus, his Nidalee, all of it. It's just not fair to play against. Other junglers just don't seem to have any sort of answer against it, and it's really, really fun to watch. Tian is playing out of his mind, some of the best League that I've seen him play in a long time, and that includes his MVP season a couple of years back. The rest of this team is doing well in that same vein. Jackie Love on Senna continues to be a complete cheat code. Mako still continues to play like the best support in the world. The crazy thing about Mako is he's first to every objective. How does he constantly have prio to every single objective? Why is he allowed to just be first everywhere on the map? His mental is just, it must be that much better. Is his macro that much better? I don't know, but he's constantly first everywhere he goes. There is no one that is actually able to keep up with Mako. It's super funny to watch, but 369 continues to win in the top lane. Cream looked awesome in this series, especially in their late game 5v5s after a lot of the resources had been gathered. One of the things that I really value for TES is because they're winning everywhere, they're actually allowed to get every resource on the map. They're able to get grubs, they're able to get dragons. They don't have to sacrifice anything. They really don't have to because they win everywhere. Again, maybe that's not consistent against the best teams in the world, but it's facilitated by the fact that they are just straight up winning every single lane. They're winning the jungle matchup, they're winning every objective fight, and there's no weaknesses on the team right now. They look so good, so utterly dominant. They look like the best team in the league. There's really no other way to say it. I don't think they will be, but they kind of look like it right now in terms of their performances. For OMG, you know, they're bad. We know they're bad. We knew they were bad earlier on this week. We know they're bad now that they moved to 1-8, but losing to Top Esports is far from worst case scenario for a team that has lost to worse teams than that over the course of this split already. I see a lot of people defending Starry. He was okay this series. I think this might have been the best series he's had so far this split. That's kind of saying something. I don't think Starry has been particularly good. I know people are really excited about him because, you know, the LDL fans are really like, oh, this guy dominated. I didn't see like the mechanical ceiling when I was watching the tape in the LDL. I think he falls into that bracket that I talk about a lot on this channel that I don't want to toot my own horn, but that I've been right on a lot over the course of this channel's history, which is LPL fans just being obsessed with whoever the next big 80 carry prospect is. In the LPL, it was 1xN, it was Assume, it was Doggo, it's all of these players that have just never really turned out to be that guy. Starry reminds me so much of those players, and I get that maybe it's too early to call it you know, players like 1xN or Assume even, but I don't know. I just don't see why people are so infatuated with Starry. He has really good, he has a really good ability to capitalize when his teammates generate gold for him, but that's a pretty basic trait at the LPL level. I would be shocked if he ever became like a superstar at the LPL level, but I get it. People are excited about him. I still don't think he's been that good. I think that top lane continues to be a negative. Harry is going to get dud of the series, his first one here on OMG. Top lane continues to be a weakness no matter who's in that role. Harry was not particularly good on anyone's legend this past split, and, you know, he's not going to be an instant upgrade to Cube. Like I said, he was going to be an upgrade in the sense that like he's got upside at the very least and there's potential there, but that's only because Cube was bad, not because Harry was good. There was a reason, you know, that he got replaced on AL and all of a sudden that team started to win. I'm not saying that causation equals like results. I hate that line of thinking, but what I am saying is that Harry getting replaced was not a downgrade for AL. PB God continues to struggle. Angel is just not winning in the mid lane like he was in the last 2 splits, and that's disappointing. And Xiao Fang had a really rough week. I really like Xiao Fang. I think he can recover from this and still be an interesting jungler, but not a good week at all. He played really poor across all of week 2, so OMG just not looking good. They look like a bad team, clearly the worst in Group C, and one that I wouldn't expect is going to make all that many waves right now, and they're certainly worse than they were in spring. And then for Top Esports, this is one of the best teams in the world. I'm sorry, I know some people don't want to call them that yet because they lost to G2 in a best of 5. Like, great, I get it. Like, I understand the negativity surrounding this team, but going to the finals, beating JDG twice, all of that is still there. This very much has the makings of being the second best team in the LPL by a pretty considerable margin if they just keep up this pace, and that's not due to teams like JDG underperforming. That's how good top esports is. I get the reservation when it comes to a team like TES, but when you win like this, it's hard not to feel at least some level of confidence towards them. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL week number 2 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen now, you can see the updated LPL standings after 2 weeks of action, of course, separated by group. Of course, the colors, the little like confirmations are denoted at the bottom of the screen. If they are guaranteed for Pool A, that upper pool, they will be highlighted in green. That only applies to one team. If they are guaranteed for the bottom, they are highlighted in orange. And of course, nobody has officially locked themselves in for a bottom tier spot yet, so that's a good thing to see. But let's go ahead and talk about the risers and the fallers in my personal power rankings. If you want to see what they look like on the screen, of course, they're going to be listed under the power ranking and the change columns. Under the power ranking column is going to be where I personally power rank these teams from number 1 to number 17. The change column is how that has changed from last week to this week. We can go over risers, fallers, just my general thoughts. I think the one thing that's going to stand out to a lot of people is that I haven't really done a big change in the upper echelon. That's because as much as I would like to move some teams up or down, as much as I would like to sit here and claim that some teams definitely are or aren't going to perform or underperform their expectations right now, like Weibo Gaming looks bad, LNG looks bad, NIP looks bad. Who's taking their spots? Like, who below them deserves to be above them right now? That's really the hard part, is that everybody in the LPL is inconsistent at the current moment, and it's really just up to who I think is going to figure that out, or who's most likely to figure that out more. We'll talk about that when we get to the individual rankings. For Group A, JDG going to stay at top. They're going to stay at number 3. I feel like that's pretty fair, but EDG jumping into the top 10. They're going to move to number 9. They are clearly a top 10 team right now, and they clearly feel like the second best team in this group, and so their ranking will be reflected as such. FPX falls down to number 11. I still think this team could theoretically be competitive, you know, just about as much as they were last split. I almost put them at number 12, but I don't think they are worse than Rare Atom. We'll get into that, but they right now are the best team that I do not think will be making the top 10. They still should be a team that even if they go down to Pool B is good enough to get a play-in spot, but I don't think they will be much more than that. And Thunder Talk moving down to number 16. This is one of the worst teams in the league. They've not been able to really accomplish anything so far. For Group B, BLG, of course, staying at number 1, but one of our biggest risers, WE, jumping up to number 5 in my power rankings. They go all the way up, and honestly, I considered putting them at number 4. This team looks really good right now, and I get it. Their series against BLG wasn't perfect. They had a couple of underperformances. LP scares the shit out of me in terms of projecting WE into the future because I just do not think he is good enough for you to be a top 5 team with, but everybody else in that team is doing their part right now. Fofo's playing out of his mind. He's playing like an MVP, and I think Wayward should generally be a positive. Even Hang, I think, has generally been good at the start of this split. I think 5 is honestly fine for this team, especially because they are the one team that jumps up ahead of all of these other teams that have really struggled right now. LGD is also going to skyrocket up at 13, if only because they actually won a series, and that's something that is kind of rare for the really bad teams in the league right now, so they move up to 13. RNG, though, maybe shockingly going to fall down to number 17. I really do believe that RNG is the worst team in the LPL right now. I think they have shown the worst tape. I don't really see it getting better. I think that's my thing with them, is I just don't really see an avenue in which it gets better for them. They're in one of the easier groups in the entire league. WE and LGD should be beatable teams for them, and they've not even been remotely competitive. They got beaten by LGD. That's a really horrible place to be. RNG, for me, falls in at that number 17 spot until proven otherwise. For Group C, Top Esports is the first team to officially lock in their spot in Pool A in the upper pool. It's not a huge surprise. Some people were super bold and said there was going to be some big MSI hangover for Top Esports. We don't know how MSI hangovers work. They're not consistent at all. And so, yeah, Top Esports is one of the best teams in the world. They're going to stay at number 2, if only because Bilibili is so good, but they've looked like the best team in terms of tape so far. LNG is going to fall 1 to number 7. It's going to be pretty consistent among LNG, Ninjas in Pyjamas, Weibo Gaming, all of these teams kind of in this cluster. They're going to drop because they have to, but I don't really feel comfortable about anybody below them going above them, at least until proven otherwise. Rare Atom going to stay at 12. I think a lot of teams around there either moved up or down, but I feel basically the same about Rare Atom as I did before. They need to clean up their macro. They're not a perfect team, but I think they could win games, and that's why they're above a lot of the other worst teams in the league. And then OMG dropping to 14. This team sucks. I don't really imagine a world in which they're going to be all that competitive, and so they drop into that lower echelon as well. And then finally for Group D, somehow, some way, AL is going to lose to Weibo Gaming and stay at number 4 because nobody else has come to take that spot from them. Maybe they could lose it if they continue to be inconsistent, but I have to imagine they're going to be able to figure things out, and at least for now, they're going to keep that number 4 spot and number 1 in the group. Weibo Gaming going to move down to 8, Ninjas in Pyjamas down to 6. I just don't feel comfortable enough changing the order of these teams right now. I get that Weibo Gaming beat AL, but I still also don't feel comfortable in this team at all. Same thing with Ninjas in Pyjamas. They have a clear strategy, but if that strategy is stopped, they don't have a way to win games, and I don't really know who to put above them. Maybe LGD Gaming can jump up to this number 6 spot, and, you know, we'll feel good about that eventually. I'm not there yet. That team still has too many concerns and questions to me, and they really haven't proven it. They're against FPX and Thunder Talk. Like, yeah, they're winning those games pretty handily, but it's not like those teams are star teams. They haven't proven that they can be a top 6 team just yet, and I don't really know who to go in that spot, and so they keep their places for now. Ultra Prime is going to stick at number 10. Again, this team can win games. They're not completely inept, but I don't think they're going to be competitive much beyond, like, beating the teams that are super inconsistent. And then IG is actually going to go up 2 spots to number 15. They're not the worst team in the league. They ended up winning a series, which is really cool for them. I just don't think that it's going to be all that consistent. I wouldn't expect that to be something that they could carry over into future performances. So those are my power rankings. Critique me on, you know, not going up enough, or you know, maybe having some of these teams too high. Let me know what you agree and disagree with down in the comment section below. But it's time to move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week here for week number 2. Player of the week was super easy for me. It's going to go to Tion. If anybody picks anything else this week, they are absolutely trolling. Tion was absolutely masterful for Top Esports. They played 4 games and he obliterated all 4. This was one of the easiest players of the week that I've ever had to choose. This was never even really up for debate. Tion was easily the best player in the LPL in week number 2. And then my runners-up, my honorable mentions, Solo Kill, the top laner for EDG. It's really cool to see him in this space. I hope he can keep it up. He had a great week number 2. If he's able to maintain that could be a huge get for EDG, because stabilizing that top side could be huge for this team. And then Elk is also going to get an honorable mention, a runner-up here for Bilibili. They did go 2-0 in terms of their series, even if they weren't super consistent. Elk had a very good week, and especially that second series against WE, he essentially won it for them. So definitely more than has earned his runner-up here, but player of the week, Tion, was super easy. And dud of the week, unfortunately, has to go to Zhao Feng. Honestly, I don't even think he played horrible. I think that there were at least some bright spots to Zhao Feng's week. I just think the problem is that nobody in the LPL really played all that bad this week. I think in a majority of weeks, he probably wouldn't have gotten dud of the week. I just think, unfortunately, OMG generally was kind of bad across this whole week, and nobody really stood out as having, like, a tremendously terrible performance. And so, unfortunately, Zhao Feng is going to get that. I believe in his bounce back. I believe in him as a player. I think he's really interesting, but he did have a pretty rough week. He kind of got abused by both of the junglers that he ended up playing into. So, Zhao Feng's going to get my dud of the week. Tion is going to get my player of the week, but that is going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only cover the LPL on this channel. We cover all 4 of the major regions every single week, as well as the NACL. And so if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.